on April 21st. So we'll start with a roll call before we discuss any amendments to the agenda. I'm just going to go off my list of commission members. So Megan Roy, I know is not here. Peter Conlon.
Good morning, Peter Conlon, Chair of the House Education Committee and appointee from the Vermont House.
Thank you. Senator Cummings. Oh, no, she's here. Secretary Saunders.
Here, good morning.
Rebecca Samaroff.
Good morning, here as well.
Great. Jennifer Deck Samuelson.
Here, good morning, Chair of Vermont State Board of Education.
Jay Nichols.
Jay Nichols, VPA rep here.
Mike Licklider is not here today. Jeff Fannin.
Good morning, Jeff Fannin, Executive Director of Vermont NEA.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Jennings. I'm the president-elect for Vermont Association of School Business Officials.
And John Castle.
Morning, everybody. John Castle, Executive Director for the Vermont Rural Education Collaborative.
And Oliver Olson, are you here today? Nope. Okay, that leaves me, Nicole Mace. I'm the representative for the Vermont School Boards Association. I serve on the board of the Winooski School District as a school board member. Any amendments to the agenda? Okay, great. So we've got 3 different sets of minutes to approve. We'll start with the approval of the April 7th regular meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes? Jay? Second? Jen? Any discussion of those? All right. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 Great, those have been approved. Minutes of the April 7th public input session. I get a motion to approve those.
I'll move.
Jen, thank you. Jay, second. Excellent. Any discussion of those minutes? Go ahead, Jen.
I just caught a couple of typos, which I think are pretty non-substantive. On page 3, under Susan Schoenfeld field, there's just experience hanging out on the last line, which I think could just be deleted. And then on page 4, Stephanie, retired teacher, instead of saying I do not, I would just say she does not. But with those 2 amendments, I would approve them.
Okay. Thank you. I'm assuming either Suzanne or Maureen can help us make those changes.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes with those 2 slight adjustments proposed by Jen?
Aye.
Aye.
Say aye.
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 I'm going to abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Thank you, Zoe. Last one is the approval of the December 2nd public input session minutes. Any motion for those? Thank you, Jen. Moving the business along. Do I get a second?
Sure.
Second from Jay. Thank you. Any discussion of those minutes?
Yeah, just quick, this is awfully late from December, and it's hard to know why it is. We just missed these or something earlier or something?
I think we might have.
Yeah, we missed them along the way, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. I know you weren't chair then.
I'm not chair now. I'm just subbing.
Right. Chairing the meeting. How's
I'm
that?
chairing the meeting. That's correct. All right. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the December 2nd public input session meetings, please say aye.
Aye.
I will also abstain. I don't believe I was there.
I'll abstain as well.
Okay. At this point, we will transition to public to be heard. We have about 10 minutes on the agenda for this. And we also have it again at the end of the agenda. So if you have an interest in addressing the commission, you can raise your hand. And I'll try and call on you in the order in which your hand is raised.
I think this is a first.
Yeah, I don't see any hands. Ken? Nothing? No, I'm kidding. All right. Well, we have another opportunity at the end of the meeting. So for folks who want to share their thoughts, we always welcome that. And at this point, we'll move on to the legislative update. Peter, that's you.
Good morning, everybody. So when it comes to sort of education transformation, the debate has now largely moved to the Senate with the passage of the House plan. So we are, in a way, sort of turning our attention a little bit to sort of smaller issues, as well as sort of preparing for the next session based on some assumptions, such as moving to larger districts and sort of all of the things that we would need to empower new school boards to do and things like that. So we're trying to get our head around a lot of those bigger concepts and that bigger work. We also had Megan Roy came in and gave us kind of an update on the work of the commission. I was actually out of the room for that, doing something else. But the reaction from many of our committee members was strong support for the work plan that has been laid out and continued support for the work of the commission, especially, just sort of given that there are so many unknowns out there between, what the legislature will ultimately arrive at, frankly, how the, decisions at the federal level could sort of implode everything. We believe that the work is important to continue. So, I mean, that's about it. I know the Senate is really just in the initial phases of diving into the bill that we sent over. They are essentially dividing up the work, much as we did with Senate Finance looking into foundation formula, property tax reform, property appraisal reform, all of that work, and then Senate Education taking on the policy and governance language. I'm not sure much got done on all of that last week, but it looks like they probably both have full agendas this week with their time mainly devoted to this work. And I think that's about what I have.
Thank you, Peter. Is there a summary of the bill that commission members could access?
I will.
Like a 2-pager or something.
There are about 40 summaries of the bill.
Yeah.
I will try to find one that works and send it off to everybody.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, good reminder.
Any questions? Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Peter. Couple questions, not necessarily connected to each other. I'm wondering, first of all, if there's any discussion in the General Assembly about costs of healthcare, because that keeps getting identified over and over again as one of the driving costs of the increased property tax rate. And then my second question is, I know, because I was reading Megan's write-up, there's been a lot of questions from members of the public about how public input is going to be considered by and incorporated into any changes that are made. And I didn't know if you had an update about that.
Yeah, thanks. Both excellent questions. Concerning healthcare, the legislature is taking a deep dive into reference-based pricing. It's a bit challenging. Just for example, if you were to implement it kind of like right now, today, Rutland Regional Medical Center would immediately lose $50 million. That's not really something that can happen at a time when frankly, our rural hospitals, most of them are in serious financial predicaments. It's a hard nut to crack. It's sort of right up there with public education. In fact, I'd probably call it more sort of crisis leaning because of our demographics. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot of ideas or input or sort of leadership when it comes to healthcare from the governor to the extent that we are on education. So it's a hard one. Anyway, it's under lots of discussion. Again, they're taking a dive into reference-based pricing to the extent that could work, or maybe how it could work on a phased-in process. And we had a report by consultants done that really sort of highlighted what the challenges are. And they're very similar to the challenges in education. We have an aging demographic. We have rural hospitals that are costly and financially precarious, and we need to make hard decisions. So that's where that is. In terms of sort of public input, one of the discussions we had about the Commission on the Future of Public Education and its ongoing work is that it's at this point, it's sort of the only sort of out there, very public facing organization whose mission is to be public facing that is taking input. And it's sort of, it's a challenging role for the Commission to be in because some of the input we're getting is not necessarily tied directly to the work we're doing. But we continue to believe that that's an important role that it plays. I'm not sure if the Senate has like a public hearing process set up. We are actually doing a public hearing, not on any specific legislation, but on just sort of education in general, that is really specifically for students on Friday to really try to get the youth voice as part of the discussion. There's no question that whatever we pass this year will need to be part of, as we go to sort of form larger districts, will have to be part of, I would say, significant public facing work. And I would say public hearings next year.
Thank you. I had a question more for Zoe than Peter, but did anyone else have a question for Peter based on his report before I ask my question? So my question is, I saw the governor had a statement after 454 passed, saying that there were many changes that were needed in order to earn final support. And I'm just wondering, so if you're able to share, as the commission is separating into different groups and we're thinking about the different proposals on the table, and I'm not able to monitor all the conversations in all the Senate committees, but are there specific changes that are being sought in the Senate as part of this process that you think the commission should be aware of at this point?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for the question. We attended a Senate Finance meeting last week to really lay the framework for how we will coordinate moving forward on refinements to push the bill over the finish line. I think what's really important is we're starting from a place of a lot of shared agreement. And that's what we focused on and highlighted on Friday. There are, I think, shared goals in terms of moving to a foundation formula, in terms of reaching scale through larger districts, in terms of standardizing some of our education quality measures to make sure that there's consistency specific to graduation rate and class size. And I think there's also a recognition that this cannot be a cookie cutter approach, and that we really need to be mindful around how we're making these recommendations, knowing that we're not going to have the same kind of school everywhere across the state with the same enrollment. That's not ever been part of the expectation. And so with that, we need to be really clear on developing that criteria. And I think both the governor's proposal and the House bill recognize all of those things and really understand that we need to take a comprehensive approach in looking at these three policy levers. of scale, education quality, and funding. So I think it's really helpful that we're starting from that place, and it's important to make that explicit. Where we have, I think, areas we need to further refine is thinking around the timeline itself, and also thinking about the actual foundation funding formula. So we are doing a deeper dive really to understand the proposal. Both the governor's proposal and the House bill contemplates a future state using an evidence-based model. The bills put forward a different bridge in order to get there, knowing that we can't flip a switch and move from our current state to that future state. And so there's just some questions around what that transition looks like and how we do that in a way that is responsible and mitigates risk. I do think there's risk of moving too slow. There's risks of moving too fast, and there's a recognition that we are operating in a really challenging financial point in time with our state funding, and then there's kind of broader uncertainty with the federal context. And so we're really trying to be really thoughtful and proactive in providing really clear guidance and moving at a speed that will really support the transformation and not push down a lot of these tough decisions continually down to the districts, where they're going to be faced year over year with, either cutting services, right? Like that's the option on the table. And so that's where we're working, is really around the details around the funding and making sure we're understanding what goes into that formula and how it impacts districts. We know that we need to mitigate the financial cliffs. So we talked about that in terms of our initial testimony to Senate Finance, and then the transition, really understanding what this looks like, how we operationalize it, and how we're continuing to put students at the forefront of this, and making sure that we can measure those impacts and ensure that it's really strengthening our public education system. So with that, we've put together a very simple rubric looking at the really three components of the bill and making sure that we're all starting from a place of shared understanding around what goals we're trying to achieve, because there are choices that will be made along the way, based on the financial realities and the realities too around the timeline. And so that's why we're pushing to really be concrete. Like when we put forward the governor's proposal, we outlined some very specific policy objectives, and I think we want to make sure that those are consistent with the House and the Senate, and that as we look at different timelines and really looking at the funding, being able to quantify the degree to which it achieves all of those goals. So as an example, one of the policy objectives that we put forward was to expand access to career and technical education, to achieve teacher pay equity, right? And so as we look at those objectives along of others, we need to understand how changes within the framework will impact our ability as a state to deliver on those objectives. And that's what we're trying to center our feedback around, is around the actual policy objectives and being methodical and disciplined and evaluating to the degree that we can achieve those as we work through the bill.
Thank you. I think it would be really helpful to see the timeline for 454 in terms of the benchmarks that would need to be met, and to compare that against a different timeline, because I think just those of us on this call who've gone through district mergers in real life, know the complexity. And so, I think my bias is towards a longer timeline, just because I know some of these pieces take a while, but I'm definitely interested in understanding what an alternative timeline looks like and what the trade-offs might be for each of these. I think, to the extent any proposal is looking to address the cost side of the equation, whether it's from a district, existing district structure board, which I sit on right now, thinking about next year's budget and whatever possible cuts may arise, if we implement something sooner, my understanding is there are likely to be I mean, we don't just save money by making bigger districts. We save money by reducing the amount of personnel that are hired or buildings that we operate, et cetera. So I think it's just a matter of who's making that decision and what the impacts are on students, right? And so that's where really connecting those dots becomes important, so that folks can understand the relative trade-offs associated with different timelines.
Absolutely.
Different
Yeah.
strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's important that we center all of these conversations around the shared goals, and what we're hoping to achieve, and being really concrete around how this can be operationalized. Because you're right, there are a series of trade-offs, and I think it's really important to make those explicit, as we do this in a way that is going to be balanced and responsible, and supportive of improving student opportunities. So I agree. I think over the next several weeks, it's going to be of paramount importance that we get into the weeds a little bit more, in understanding tactically what this will look like, and how we can compare different timelines and be really concrete around the pros and cons. Totally agree.
Yeah, and I think if we could have something for the next commission meeting on May 5th, just even
That'd be helpful.
the committees could dig into those, answer the questions we're going to be wrestling with in the context of some really concrete choices.
I'm going to be pressured to get that together pretty quickly, so I will definitely have that by May 5th.
Right.
I'd be happy to bring that here.
Great. Anyone have any questions for Zoe or Peter before we shift gears to an Afton Partners update? Which I actually have a observation that may serve as a bridge to this update or not. Just at the last so Zoe, you referenced there seeming to be alignment on the need to address governance, finance, and sort of the quality statewide, standards, as part of a single package. Certainly the commission had that as part of its findings in its preliminary report. The feedback that I heard at our last public input session was a lot of confusion and pretty direct feedback that folks don't understand why those three things should be done. So a lot of the discussion at my table was, why are we even talking about governance? Isn't this just a funding issue? So I think just collectively, we all have some work to do, to build public understanding of why those three areas are, intersectional. And my sense is that there's a gap there in public understanding, certainly public demand or will for this level of comprehensive overhaul. I think once people start to unpack what it means for them and their district, there's certainly a lot of questions that folks have. And so that's an area I think the commission should talk about, as part of our public information sessions. We did arrive at that finding, do we need to refine our messaging or create more information for the public about why we felt that way, and why the House's proposal and the governor's proposal and likely the Senate's proposal are going to coalesce in that same manner. Jen.
Thanks. So this is kind of a thought in progress, I would say, but one of the things I'm reflecting on is we hear a lot in public comment, particularly with our smaller rural districts. We didn't ask for schools to get closed. We just wanted our tax rates to come down. And I am sensitive to that. And I'm sensitive to, I live in a rural district. I'm sensitive to the fact that people raised an issue that they wanted the legislature to fix, and this is what we are trying to do. But I think it would be helpful to have an inflection point at somewhere along the process to say, okay, we heard you, public, you wanted tax rates to go down. This is what change is going to look like. And then have a conversation where people might say, but that isn't what we want. Maybe we're willing to accept a higher tax rate to keep some of the things that we want. And I'm not prejudging any outcome here, but I do think that if we are public facing, that it needs to be not just us sort of telling the public what the answer is going to be based on the first question that was raised a year ago, but to have a continued dialogue to say, this is what change is going to look like. You've asked us to bring the tax rate down. This is how we're going to accomplish it. And just, collectively have some sort of opportunity for people to buy in on what that change is. So I just throw that out.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Jay.
Jen hit on part of what I was going to say, and I just want to give all of us some feedback that I've received from a few of my members and from a number of people that I've talked about. Several principals and people that are talking to them are saying that most people don't really want governance changes. Now, you all know that I think we do need some governance changes. I'm just sharing with you what I'm hearing from different people. And they also don't want small schools to close, although there's overwhelming agreement that some really, really small schools should close because of opportunities for kids. There's less agreement on that at the elementary level than there is the high school level. So I think that's something we need to think about. Schools that are like K-3, very few people want to see those schools close. As kids get older, there's a lot more talk about kids having opportunities, especially in things like world languages, AP classes, choices at the high school level come up over and over again. And I've also heard some pushback on the number 400, around 400 size for elementary school and 4,000 number for a district. Particularly if we already have a district and we're not an SU, we're a district and we're actually efficient and we're kind of at the scale you want for class sizes, why can't we just be our own district? And it's kind of hard to argue with that if they already are at they're already pretty efficient and their class sizes are within that range that we've been talking about. So just something I thought I would share. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Zoe.
Agree that it's important for us to continue to have this conversation and build understanding. I think the term governance is kind of losing sight of what we're hoping to achieve, which is really scale and equity. And I think being able to communicate that is important. I also think, regarding school size, the governor's proposal assumed that we would keep many of our small schools and really ensured that, that was part of the overall model, that there wouldn't be an arbitrary cutoff of a certain enrollment number that would mean your school would close. There was an assumption that you would have be able to accommodate the preference for smaller elementary schools, particularly in our rural communities, and that we would need to also identify how we would evaluate, quality and financial viability, because that's important for sustainability. So I think the proposal is more nuanced than probably was interpreted, and that's okay. I think that's why we need to revisit that conversation, recognizing that this is not a one-size-fits-all, and actually getting to larger scale in many ways help you to sustain smaller schools in a way that cannot be within our current construct. So all of these things are important to bring into the conversation because there are a lot of, as you said at the beginning, Nicole, trade-offs, right? But as we did our sample budgeting, we built in those priorities to keep elementary schools, the smaller elementary schools intact while expanding enrollment for middle and high school to offer more opportunity, right? So again, we need to be able to provide the right framework so that we're ensuring equity of opportunity for students while allowing for that flexibility for the local communities to make those priority decisions within the budget parameters. So I think there's we need to really help to communicate when we're going to this funding formula, how we're going to ensure quality and kind of what are those guardrails, and then where is that flexibility where communities are able to make those choices that are going to be in the best interest of their students.
And making sure that those ability to make choices are not reserved for more affluent communities, right? So if you have a foundation formula where the assumptions are based on a certain amount of scale, to say to a community, you could decide to stay open, but the funds that you have available to you will be significantly less than you potentially need, then within the foundation formula. So I actually think like specific examples for folks will be really helpful so that they can start to see what does this actually mean. And I know that, you can't say with certainty what a new district, the choices a new district might make, but I think moving from sort of principles and values and into this is how it would functionally work, and the decisions that you're going to be facing, including, the fact that in order to merge high schools, you need a new building. What timeline does that, so again, I think the more specific on timeline, decision, et cetera, the better people will be able to wrap their heads around what is this going to look like.
I agree. And I also think that districts are currently facing these same questions and challenges, right? Our current state is, requiring our school boards and our superintendents to grapple with these very questions. And I think what we have heard from the field is let's make sure that we have real alignment at a state level so that we're doing this in a way that is fair across all communities in our state and is leading to better opportunities. But I agree that there's a lot of shared understanding. I think about the principles and what we want to see for our system. And we're now in a place where how do we really get tactical? What does this mean for me? What does this look like? And what are the different options? So I've completely agreed.
Thank you. Jeff Fannin, sorry.
Yeah. Interesting conversation, good conversation. So add to it a little bit. I agree with all of it, but I agree with a lot of it. And the discussion you, Nicole, and Zoe were having, Zoe, you just said something that struck me, which is there are several, a lot of my members are saying, what are we doing? There's schools closing right now. We are grappling with this at a community by community basis. Sometimes we're not doing this quickly as some might like, but it is happening. So what is it that we really want to address? And we, the governor's plan wants to accelerate it much faster. The House plan is a little bit more slow, methodical. And so how do we get there, even though it's happening as we speak? And the other piece I'm hearing from members around the state is it is happening. And as we said, and there's good in the House plan and some challenges and concerns. So, but it's sort of the globe is, the snow globe is shaking as we speak at the federal level. And this would add to it. So people are saying, wait, which way should we be going? And we don't know what's going on at the federal level. And we're 3 months into this presidency, this administration, and we've got 4 years to go. So planning in a really structurally dynamic environment at the federal level, trying to plan for that at the local level is really difficult, and people are really struggling with that. It's fear, it's anger, it's all the above. And just the fear of the unknown, and people are reacting to that. Some of the conversations I think, Nicole, you had at your table maybe reflected that. People are anxious about what they don't know is coming at them at the federal level. So why are we changing so much at the state level? We do have control there, and that's what I'm hearing. But can we hang on for a little bit and see what happens at the federal level? It doesn't mean we shouldn't change. It just means that people are anxious about change, that given all the change happening at the federal level.
Thank you, Jeff. Jay, and then we'll shift gears to the Afton Partners update. But
yeah, real briefly, just wanted to say, it kind of ties a little bit into everything everybody else has said. We need to, as much as possible, be really concrete, transparent, clear is fundamental. That, to touch on what Jeff just said, the ambiguity out there is very hard for people. When you're trying to have a conversation with a classroom teacher or a board member or somebody who just has kids in the system, there are systemic issues in our system that we need to address. I totally agree. But we need to really make sure that we don't create new problems while we try to solve long-term issues. And I just think we want to be so transparent that nobody can ever say this was done to them, but that everybody has input and then we make decisions that are best for the system overall. I think that probably goes without saying, but I thought I'd say it anyway, Nicole.
Thank you, Jay. So just to close out legislative update, sounds like we're going to hope in advance of the May 5th meeting to have some summary of the House bill and timelines associated with the House bill, and some timeline from the governor's perspective, so we can start to unpack what the trade-offs might be in our committee structure. Okay, thank you all. Now I'm gonna hand the mic, the reins over to our Afton partners.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be with you again. I feel like this conversation was a really nice segue into the presentation that we're going to share back with you. So let me pull up my screen here so you all can see this. Is everyone seeing that okay? All right.
Yep.
I'm going to get all my screens in front of me. Okay, so a lot of us in this last conversation were sharing feedback that we have heard from constituents and folks across the state, and this conversation is going to continue that. So our goal this morning is twofold. One, we want to share sort of a summary of themes that the commission has heard through its various public input sessions over the past year, and then more specifically dive into the themes and takeaways from the last input session on April 7th. And then we'll close by just talking about how that shifts or creates a pivot for the way that Afton will engage and help support the commission in its goals. So the first round of feedback that I'm going to present is really from this past not quite a year, 9 months or so. So any public comments that were made to the commission during any of their commission meetings, steering committee meetings, subcommittee, public input sessions, etc. We took all of the notes from that and synthesized those into sort of these overall takeaways. So I'm going to dive into that first and talk about some overall themes. And some of these will be familiar to what folks just shared. So the top, there's a lot of words on here. I'm not going to read them all, but the top line, sort of headline, voices over the theme of each slide. So this idea that the commission must make a concerted effort to elevate underrepresented voices in all stages of planning and decision-making in order to not leave out any perspectives. You can see a couple of quotes that were pulled on the left-hand side there. And so just some consideration for the commission in terms of who is being engaged in public input sessions. There were some specific groups named right there in the middle, and some specific organizations that were called out to help engage underserved communities, and then also to make public input sessions accessible for various populations as well, which I know the commission has been working to do, and Afton in our role is trying to support that as well. The next sort of key takeaway here is that a lot of feedback cited a lack of trust and communication from both local school boards and the Agency of Education, and we're urging the commission to create consistent norms and practices to improve transparency around decision-making. So this idea for clear, accessible information to be made available for folks, reducing jargon where possible. I think Jay, maybe you were saying this idea of just making sure everyone has the information in order to be able to participate meaningfully as folks are coming from different seats within the community. And then just clarity around the commission's purpose, workflows, subcommittee structure, et cetera. Again, I know Afton is helping to support that with some key messaging, and so we can continue to do that. And then just request made to continue what you all are doing, which is publishing your meeting schedules, minutes, documents, et cetera, and broadening that outreach for input opportunities. The third takeaway is that folks tend to be frustrated over the lack of timely, accurate, and relevant data, and feel like without that, the commission can't make effective decisions that are centering equity. And so there's some concern over access to the agency of education, the data that exists there, requests for some transparency around district consolidation. Again, that's building on the conversation we were having this morning about how we share all of this and allow people to engage in that conversation. A need for disaggregated data by disability, race, ethnicity, geography, etc. And so just asking for more of that in order to make clear and impactful decisions. And then the last takeaway from the input sessions, there were sort of mixed reviews on consolidation savings under Act 46, as well as concerns over budget timelines, the idea of local autonomy, and school district disruptions. And so those were raising a few red flags for members of the public, and there was an urging from folks for the commission to avoid focusing narrowly on cost reduction and instead focus more broadly on how funding structures are impacting equity and quality, and an interest in the commission using best practices from other states to study the impact of student-centered funding reforms. So those are the sort of rolled up takeaways from the past 9 months or so. And I'm going to turn now to our most recent input session on April 7th and talk specifically about some of those. I'll also say this slide deck will be made available to everyone. So, and recognize there's a lot of things on here you may want to dive in deeper and read more thoroughly. So this will be shared with you after the meeting. Okay, so as a reminder, at the April 7th meeting, we had both in-person input sessions as well as virtual. And so this is the summary here combines both sets of input that we received, in-person and virtual. And so there were specific themes and questions that we asked related to a variety of topics. So the first was around equity, belonging, and inclusion. And you can see here that folks that were participating on April 7th are really concerned about the erosion of equity and DEI efforts, particularly due to the federal pressure on that. There's some mistrust of the Agency of Education's education overhaul plan, a perception that it's seen as top-down, lacking community input. Parents and educators emphasize need for safe, inclusive, identity-affirming environments, particularly for BIPOC and LGBTQ+ students. And then a desire to frame schools and education as a public good that supports the whole student and family, not just academics. So this, there's a lot of conversation around the role that schools play in local communities. The next set of questions we asked were around sort of the consolidation and rural schools as community hubs, local control, and questions of that nature. So there is a strong defense of rural schools as community anchors, and a note that they offer more than just academics, but a lot of wraparound services as well, and a desire not to lose that in specific communities. The idea that existing resources and supports, particularly free breakfast and lunch, came up quite a bit, might be taken away due to cuts in funding, and a desire not to have that happen. The fear that school closures would really hurt rural towns and local economies, and then a strong desire to maintain local control and democratic governance, and sort of a skepticism here around forced regionalization and consolidation. The next set of questions was about governance and consolidation. There was fairly broad resistance to mass district consolidation, especially under the proposed 5-district model. I will say that it was not, there was some nuance to that folks were not outright no consolidation, but I think there was a push for to do that thoughtfully and with input. And so I'll just add that nuance there, that it wasn't a blanket, we don't want this. It was sort of, can we do this carefully and thoughtfully? Consolidation, or participants feared that again, the sort of fear of rural voices being drowned out in the process of consolidation, and that if it were to occur, that careful consideration and equity needs to be a part of this process, and that any unintended consequences, particularly for historically underserved communities, would need to be identified and addressed during that consolidation process. In terms of funding, affordability, and transparency, folks emphasize the need to replace property tax-based funding with income-based models. The property tax model was seen as inequitable and outdated. Healthcare costs were seen as the main driver of school budget increases, not inefficiencies or overstaffing. I know that came up in the conversation this morning as well. And there were calls for just greater transparency and simplicity in the funding formula. Especially this gets back to the transparency piece, so that local voters are able to make more informed decisions on local budgets. And the last takeaway category here is around education quality and the workforce. So folks really felt that sort of the strong social emotional learning, mental health, teacher-student relationships were essential components to quality in education and didn't want to lose that. They also defined quality as having diverse pathways and not a one-size-fits-all outcome. There was a concern that larger schools post-consolidation would reduce some of that personalization that smaller schools currently have between teachers, staff, and students. Educators expressed exhaustion, burnout, demoralization, particularly under a lot of uncertainty about education, both federally and under the current reform proposals at the state level. And then just a fear of losing younger teachers due to budget cuts, job insecurity, lack of institutional support, etc. So those are the takeaways there. I have a couple more slides to talk about how that then sort of the thinking about the feedback and the need to gather more public input, how that is shifting Afton's proposed plan moving forward. But before I do that, I will just pause and see if there are any questions. I'm happy to go back to any of the slides if there's something you wanted to dig in more carefully on. Yeah, Zoe.
Thank you very much for sharing the themes. For the record and also for the benefit of the public, I want to be clear that the Agency of Education has not directed any changes to our diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. The efforts to dismantle DEI are coming from the federal government, and the state and the Agency of Education have held firm that diversity, equity, and inclusion are important practices to building welcoming and inclusive environments in our schools.
Thanks, Zoe. Okay. Well, let me move forward, and I'll just share a bit about sort of our revised engagement plan. So as you see here, everything on that left-hand column are things that we have completed. And so we had started our engagement by really looking at the engagement framework that the Commission had developed previously and working to revise that so that it was sort of expanded to include more opportunities and sort of equitable practices around collecting community input. And so we are finalizing a draft of that framework right now. Initially, we were going to then use that draft framework to train commission members so that everyone who is a part of the commission could sort of go out and work with trusted local partners to host listening sessions and gather that community input, and that we would do that sort of into the spring and summer, and then that would move into the fall. It seems with the trying to balance sort of the pace of everything and what's currently in the works, it felt like perhaps trying to support the commission to get more feedback sooner rather than later was maybe a more worthy goal at this point in time. And so we are proposing that Afton partners in our team would help support and facilitate 5-ish virtual engagement opportunities with priority populations across the state in order to get that specific feedback. And the questions that we would ask would be designed with input from commission members so that we're making sure we're asking sort of the targeted questions that we need to get the information that the commission needs to be able to report back to the legislature. Part of that would include dissemination of a community survey that we could also sort of cast a wider net so that folks that can't attend any of the listening sessions could also participate via survey. And then part of our engagement is to provide ongoing sort of media release and outreach. And so we would continue doing that and help to create that transparency with the public in terms of what the commission's charge is and what we're asking them to weigh in on and how their information is going to be used moving forward. So essentially what this revised proposal does is puts on hold the training of the commission members to go out and do this engagement and feedback sessions on their own, allows Afton to come in and support that. And then we would be able to do sort of the training on the back end so that the public feedback then could continue into the fall with the support of commission members and other trusted community organizations. So that is our revised plan, trying to be responsive to the pace at which things are moving and what seems like it will be most helpful to the commission in terms of helping you all sort of meet your charge. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. Yeah, Nicole.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on what impact this would have on the May 5th meeting, which I think we're currently scheduling a public input session after the regular commission meeting. And is the proposal you're presenting would replace those sort of in-person, we would start to disconnect the public input sessions from the physical in-person commission meetings, which is sort of, you know, the way we set things up before we had support from you and your organization. But just want to be clear with folks that this would mean we would still have an in-person meeting on the 5th, but the public input session would not occur at that point. Public input sessions would be held virtually moving forward with your support. Do I have that right?
Yeah, no, it's a great clarifying question. And that is our intention, is that we would sort of decouple the commission meetings from public input and host a much more targeted virtual session for those folks. And that's how sort of Afton plans to be supportive in the next near-term phase. We can do all of this, you know, sort of organize this very quickly. And knowing that they're doing in-person sessions for folks is also going to be important as well, that will be a component of our engagement moving forward. But yes, in this near term, trying to target and specifically do outreach to some of these priority populations, students, families with children who have disabilities, you know, et cetera, that we would try and do that more targeted and decouple that from commission meetings.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah.
Thanks. And I thought that was a really good summary of input that we've had. Though I do, you know, we've had sort of the audiences that we've had have maybe sort of a little bit more specific. So I'm just curious as to how you sort of engage what you are calling priority populations for virtual meetings. How do you identify them? How do you sort of encourage them to join all of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think we have a set or sort of a list of priority populations. Some were from community members that said we need to make sure we're talking with, you know, these groups of individuals. And some were included even from, I think, one of our initial commission meetings that Afton attended. Commission members had ideas of like, here's the voices that we need to make sure we're hearing. So I think we have that list fairly well set. And then our plan in terms of doing that outreach is twofold. One is sort of using commission members and identifying who are the sort of trusted community partners that have access to these populations that could help us spread the word. So we would develop the outreach and the mechanisms to do that, and then ask for support in distribution and getting the word out, and having folks, register for these online listening sessions. And then I know that our partner in this work, Collaborative Communications, has relationships within the state of Vermont, and will be leveraging those as well, in terms of doing outreach and communication. So that's our plan for sort of how to get the word out.
Jen?
Thanks. And I don't know who would be the person to answer this question, but since the commission has started and we've been going around to different counties in the state, I do notice that we've never been to Southern Vermont, and I don't know if there's a plan for that, because I think that is, again, tipping my hand here because I live in the southern part of the state, but I think there are a lot of voices that have not, had a physical opportunity to connect with the commission's work.
I believe the May 5th meeting is scheduled for Wyndham Southwest. Do I have that right? Wilmington, maybe?
Okay.
I believe that is my understanding.
Okay.
I think that's news, Nicole. I don't know that we knew. I didn't know that. So
I'm scheduling it for Wyndham Southwest.
All right. Thanks.
thank you, Suzanne.
And there are other counties in the southern part of the state too, so hopefully we can keep working our way around.
Yes, that is still part of our legislative charge, that we hold a meeting in every county. I think the question is, do we tag on the input session? And I think given the dynamic nature and the fast pace that this conversation is taking in the legislature, having a little bit more of a nimble and targeted way to engage the public, to me, makes sense. And then, hopefully in June, we know what the future looks like and what the role of this commission will be moving forward. And we can deal with that new reality as it comes, and work with Afton on a best way for us to continue to play this role, if in fact the legislature wants us to play this public facing role.
Well, and I think that kind of gets back to my point, all the more important that I really think there needs to be a concerted effort to reach out to the southern part of the state, because I think any recommended changes that are made, it would be tricky to really put those forward without having had the opportunity to hear from every facet of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Ellen and Afton? So my understanding is you're going to present a more detailed timeline for these sessions at the May 5th meeting. Is that correct?
Yes. We'll
and
do
agenda,
that.
I would presume, sort of what the questions will be that we'll be asking.
Yeah, and I would be interested in getting the commission's feedback, or a subset of maybe the engagement subcommittee's feedback on like the set of questions that we think is going to be most impactful, for you all to make sort of your final report and recommendations back to legislature. So we'll be in touch around that as well.
Thank you. I think table setting is going to be equally, in order to get input.
Mm-hmm.
Circling back to that, the commission has made the finding that finance, governance, and quality are all interconnected. Is there some work we need to do to set the stage with that as a shared understanding before we ask the questions? But
yeah.
I know there has been this subcommittee. I don't believe you've met in a while. John and Jeff, and I think Oliver, maybe we're the community engagement subcommittee. Is that work you're willing to continue to do? And if so, I think Megan and I don't really have the capacity to coordinate and facilitate those meetings. If you want to get together to review with Afton. So I guess I'd be looking for someone to volunteer to be the point person for that group, to work with Maureen and and Suzanne around warning, all the stuff associated with supporting a committee.
So I'll chime in. I don't know if John, he was here. I know he was, and Jay's here. Jay, you're on that subcommittee, right? And Oliver is not here. So I volunteer Oliver. He's
Smart.
classic. No, I would be happy, Ellen, to meet with you and others and coordinate with Jay. So Megan was there nominally as a participant and I think as chair. Does she not want to do it at all? Or if you know, Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I think she and I talked a little bit about this in anticipation of this discussion, and her goal is if she can make it to participate, she'll do that, but she does not have the capacity to sort of organize the meetings, work with Suzanne and Maureen, et cetera, to just make sure the legalities of it are dealt with.
I'm not sure what that.
If you want to,
I'm not sure what that means, Nicole, about the legality. In all seriousness, I don't know.
Well, if you're getting together as a group and you're a subcommittee, you'd have to warn the meeting. You have to take minutes. Those things.
Okay. Thank you. I just wasn't sure.
Hey, Ellen, we're happy to review your questions and give you one-on-one feedback on that. That's not a meeting, and you're not all talking together about your personal feedback. But if, as folks who have been part of this process, you want to raise your hand and say, I'd be happy to look at those questions. We don't need to meet. Those are two different options, I think.
Got it. I just didn't know what Megan was referring to. So thank you for that. Obvious.
Just the logistics around committee meetings. Yeah.
All right. I will reach out to the folks. Ellen, I believe I have your email, and
yeah, I'll put it in the chat just one more time so you can have it right here.
The chat was turned off.
Oh, was it? Oh, that's right. Well, I think I have, regardless, I will make sure that you have it.
And then I'll catch up with Suzanne, I guess, and start trying to find time. And then Nicole, are we looking to meet before the May, what'd you say, 5th?
I think, again, because there's some time sensitivity here, it would be great if you all decide a meeting is important to get Ellen feedback and discuss the questions, then try to get that on the books before the May 5th meeting when they're bringing a more detailed plan to the commission for discussion. That would be my recommendation.
Okay.
And if that becomes a really tight turnaround and not possible, perhaps Ellen could just share the thinking with those folks on the committee who could then individually just send their comments back to Ellen. And she could incorporate that as part of the presentation on the 5th.
Got it.
Yeah, I will say, Jeff, I'm more than happy to handle or work through all the logistics to meet at least one time if we are able to before the 5th. I think that would be helpful. And if it doesn't work out, no worries, but we are game for that.
Got it. Okay.
So Ellen, maybe you could work with Suzanne and to get the contact information for the folks on that group and initiate a scheduling email. Jeff, just get you a little off the hook on that, and if you all can find a time to meet, great.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
That was the offer that was on the table. Jen.
Thanks. So in the act, there was a list of organizations that the commission is supposed to be reaching out to, and I know that Afton was picking that part of the charge up. Does that connect to these public engagement sessions with the identified populations that you want to reach out to, or is that separate?
We were seeing it as separate. There may be a little overlap, but we were envisioning that more as one-on-one conversations with each of those groups, and that would be separate from the input sessions.
Okay. And just curious, do you guys have a timeline for that?
No, but as we're putting together a timeline for the 5 virtual sessions, we will work that in as well, so we can present that back on May 5th.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ellen. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, our agenda has us moving into our committees. And I believe Suzanne is ready to help us with that. So if you are a member of the public, I guess you'll just let Suzanne know which group you want to join. So as a reminder, there's a finance group, there's a governance group, and a quality group. And our charge today is to look at questions 3 and 4 on the draft framework. We have a document. I think one of the questions was we want folks to report back out, and we have this need to take minutes. So we have a sort of skeletal framework here that I could. I don't know, Suzanne and Maureen, if you have access to this. I don't think you do, but if you could distribute this document to the full commission, and then whoever is designated to take notes for your subcommittee, you can make a copy of that document and have that be your minute, your note-taking device, just so we're all focusing on the same questions that we're responding to as part of the report out, and there's a sort of a template of sorts in terms of how notes are being taken for these committee meetings. I think that would help things go more smoothly. So Maureen and Suzanne, I just shared it as like a Google Doc, and I think whatever is the easiest way to get that out to the commission. I apologize I don't have everybody on an easy email distribution like Megan does, so couldn't get it out to you all ahead of time. Any
Nicole,
questions?
I'll go ahead and I'll get that out to people. I just had a question. Is Kristen and Ellen going to be in a breakout room as well?
I think we'll jump off.
Okay.
Thanks for
All
asking.
right.
Any questions about what we're doing for the next 30 minutes or so?
Are the 2 questions that we're responding to going to be on that thing that you're sending out, Nicole?
Yes.
Okay, then no.
Questions 3 and 4. And the questions are also on the agenda. If you don't have the document ahead of time, you can just look at the agenda.
Jay, I think you and I are in the same group, correct?
You and I and Zoe, I think it's just the 3 of us.
Zoe, yeah.
And who's the other third?
Zoe,
Oh, okay.
school
So,
quality.
and I'm just wondering, because we are 15 minutes off schedule, what time should we come back?
I think we should come back at 10:40. And we will do a quick report out.
Great.
Okay.
Are we set to go to the rooms?
I think we're set for you to make the magic happen.
I'm pushing the button.
Anybody else get cut off mid-sentence?
I feel good. I got the final word in our committee.
Yeah.
It's sign of
Typical
a
politician.
engaged group.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. So in the interest of time, I hope you all were able to get those, that framework to take some notes. We have 3 groups. Let's give each group 3 minutes to report out on the themes from your conversation as you were grappling with questions 3 and 4.
Nicole, I'm just going to let you know, I've got to hop to something else, but Zoe and Jay will do a magnificent job, I am sure, in reporting out. I trust
Wonderful.
them entirely.
Thank you,
Thank
Jeff.
you all.
Good to see you. I'm happy to go first to model the behavior I'm looking for. So
Thanks for being explicit.
Yeah, right. Go. So Rebecca, Elizabeth, and I met as part of the finance committee, and we talked about the data that we would like to review as part of this transition to a foundation formula. We had a lot of conversation around, I think there's been some resistance to modeling different proposals in the existing state in terms of impact on districts. Because I think there's some, concern that modeling on the existing state would cause panic and not be supported, would cause the proposal to lose some support. But in particular, when we're thinking about underrepresented populations, it feels like the further you get from those populations and communities in terms of the modeling, the harder it is to really understand what the impacts might be. We also talked about how modeling both existing state and future state could help actually make the case for governance change. So folks can see the impact of a foundation formula with whatever the assumptions are made about that foundation formula in my existing district would be, really, really hard to absorb. But as part of a larger district, here are the opportunities that it could sort of help connect the dots. We also talked about the fact that in the House bill, there's been some tiered weights for English language learners and special education populations. We're not sure how that's been modeled at the district level to assess impact on programming. Savings in the governor's plan, again, where's the money come from and what impact would that have on underrepresented populations? So really just looking at modeling as a tool to start to connect some dots. Thinking about measuring benefits and burdens. Again, in the absence of modeling, it's difficult to see what impacts changes will have on specific communities and specific group underrepresented populations that I think are addressed in the current system, maybe not as well as they could be, but we at least know what it looks like in this in the current formula. Anything you guys want to add that I left out? I think that was 3 minutes. Okay, so we have a quality group and a governance group. Who wants to go? John, were you was it John and Jen?
Governance group. So yeah, I'll take the reins because I didn't get the note taking until after the fact, so I'm just going off what I wrote. So we looked at first, what data should we review and what do we hope to learn? We realized it couldn't be past tense because we haven't looked at it yet. But the data that we thought we wanted to review are demographics. Where is Vermont going from a student population point of view? Where is growth occurring? Where isn't it? And use this to inform considerations of scale. In an ideal world, we'd love to see data from the Act 46 consolidation with recognition that there isn't really any analysis that's been done, and sort of this realization that we might need to rely on anecdotal evidence. Another data point, to what extent are high school students having a disparate experience, and to compare larger versus smaller high schools, with recognition that it's hard to get data from small schools because the data gets suppressed. But still it would be helpful to see whether larger high schools do lead to greater opportunities for students. We would want to look at test scores to see if there's a correlation between size and score, but also realizing that looking at test scores would also need to consider other variables such as socioeconomic status, staffing ratios, things that would play into that. And then also spending, another data point would be spending at the essential office level over time, to see if there's a correlation, if consolidation of a governance structure would help to reduce those costs. And then we turned to the fourth question, which we modified slightly. So the question that we considered is, how does reducing the number of districts and shifting to a foundation formula seek to enhance services and or reduce disparities to underrepresented or underserved communities? And we flagged a few things. One is that it depends, depends on the weights that we assign, and whether districts will be able to spend above the foundation formula. We recognize that modeling will be important, and that there's a concern that the generous weights that might be assigned doesn't necessarily guarantee that those resources will be spent on the kid for whom they have been assigned. And we hope that increased educational opportunities and increased supports for students who need them will be accomplished by this governance structure, but we would want to basically create some guardrails to ensure that that happens. Did I miss anything, John and Peter?
Just the one thing that I was talking about when we got cut off, and that is that, what does future governance look like, and how do we ensure that those who are governing are making the right decisions, such as money being targeted at the kids, how do we keep these larger district governing entities as apolitical as possible, yet also as focused and sort of determined to do the right thing as possible.
And I would just add, I think it was a really good discussion, but like all of ours, these are just a part of a discussion, right? A much larger and longer discussion. So I think, if we were to continue this discussion for a longer period of time, more things will emerge and more details and all of that. So I want to make sure that people aren't saying that's what we came up with, that's what it is. This is just a starting point.
Yeah, and I think these two questions are on next month's agenda too, as part of our schedule. So you can certainly continue to unpack as you move forward. Thank you. Zoe, Jay, which one of you would like to report in your discussion?
Jay, you are a note taker. You want to take the lead, or?
Sure, I can do that. So we touched on first what data we would review because we thought that was a starting place. We think we would review academic and non-academic indicators. Examples are course offerings and outcomes, academic achievement, math, science, literacy, grad rates, and non-academic indicators, things like chronic absenteeism, for example. We spent more time talking about things like specialized educational resources that we think would be needed in a new system in terms of quality. So the extent to access of math coaches, for example, and literacy coaches, MTSS coordination within a system. What's the special education data placement of students look like in a system? How do we teach and assess non-cognitive skills? We spent quite a bit of time on that, things that we've traditionally called transferable skills here. Looking at how we evaluate those non-hard quantitative content for future ready skills, and how can we leverage technology and outdoor learning, etc. And we talked about a little bit on how does the proposed policy seek to enhance services or reduce disparities as we focus on quality? How do we have more equitable funding? We know that teacher compensation and employee compensation differs across the state. How do we make sure that we reduce those disparities and provide more resources to underrepresented or underserved communities? More equitable funding across so that there are more opportunities for all students, including in CTEs, AP courses, and in terms of teacher pay and support. And then more support for the places that need it so that we can improve culture for all in the school community. We didn't talk specifically about H454 or the governor's plan. We talked in general with any kind of governance model that we go toward and any kind of funding formula. How do we make sure that we really focus on quality of opportunity and outcomes for kids? So that's in a quick nutshell. Zoe, you want to add anything in?
You captured it. Thanks, Jay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all. Before we shift to public to be heard, I just wanted to do a quick check-in with folks. This is now the second time we've used this structure in our meetings. I heard some generally positive feedback after our last meeting. Just want to make sure steering groups meeting after this. Want to make sure folks are continuing to feel like this is a good use of our time in meetings. Sounds like the legislature was supportive of it, but we all need to be on board too. General nodding of heads.
Yeah, I think the conversations were really productive.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, with that, we'll turn it back to the public. Anyone wants to address the commission, we have some time set aside to hear from you. So just raise your hand and I'll call on folks in the order in which I see your hands. Mr. Fredette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, for the sake of saying something to not disappoint, I'd like to extend, I'm not the most technical savvy kind of guy, as you all may have figured out by now. I'd like to send kudos to Suzanne and Maureen for bouncing us around to these committee meetings and effortlessly. And also just excellent conversation by throughout the whole meeting today. So a great start to the week. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Ken. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Dr. Gannon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm going to stay off screen this morning. My computer is not really happy with Teams today. I think where I would like to just make a few comments is I'm still thinking about the summary of themes that Aston presented this morning. And, you know, as I have been one of the voices that has been showing up here for many meetings now, kind of beating the drum on making sure that there is adequate, inclusive representation of voices from across the state. That it's something that still really concerns me. And so I hope that I hope that, you know, I would like to take a look more at the themes on the slides that Aston provided. I would really encourage you all to do that as well. And to, one of the things to notice, I think, is we're not really hearing anything new. When I think about when this commission commenced, and I think it was back in September, the issues that the public is bringing forth, the concerns the public is bringing forth, when I think about the listen and learn sessions I've gone to, and seeing what else is coming in through public input, the themes are very clear. And when I think about, you know, where the gaps are and where the voices who have not felt part of this conversation, where that has landed, is my concern is that as we look forward to thinking about the timeline and thinking about what the next actions are and how we're going to get to the kind of end of this process, is that there will still be communities and populations who just weren't heard. I'm concerned that Aston will struggle a little bit. As someone who is part of many of those communities and a lot of different roles, I'm concerned that people that there's a lack of trust right now, and that there's a sense of a lack of relationship, and that will make it harder. So I'm talking to a lot of these advocacy groups and folks who I've mentioned. I would just really encourage you to think deeply about how to keep building that relationship, so that when we get to some kind of final moment here with this, that it won't feel like there were still underrepresented voices who weren't part of this conversation and who won't continue to be deeply impacted. So anyway, thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any other members of the public who wish to address the commission? Okay. Let the record show we're ending 5 minutes early today. Hope you all have a wonderful week, and we'll see you on the 5th, and you'll get more details on that as they get finalized in terms of location.
Good job, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Just
everybody.
to be official, we probably need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, motion to adjourn.
So
My
made.
goodness. Jay,
So made.
Zoe, all those in favor?
All right.
Woo! Thank you, Peter. Bye.